This show has been brought to you by Smith's Detection and the National Air Traffic Controllers Association.
My voice is the voice that guides you home safely each and every day.
24 hours a day, 365 days a year.
I am the voice of the safest and most efficient airspace in the world.
I have to be 100% of the time.
I am.
I am.
I am.
I am a professional air traffic controller.
I'm Todd Hauptli, and I'm joined today in the studio by Peter Neffenger, TSA Administrator. Mr. Administrator, thank you very much for spending time with us. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Todd. Thanks for the opportunity.
You are closing in on your first 100 days in office, if you will, 2.5, 3 months in. Initial observations, and what are some of the key initial things that have been important for you to go do?
Well, as you're right, I swore in on the 4th of July of this year, and I spent the first week out at the Aspen Security Forum. I went there, and that was a great opportunity to meet with some of the security professionals from around the country as well as around the world. Following that, I spent a lot of time on the road over the month of the remaining month of July and August. I wanted to get out and see a good representation of the industry that I'm now responsible for, not just the aviation industry, but the surface industry as well. I think I've visited 15 airports so far, and they've ranged from the largest to the smallest. Have met with many of the airport executives on wherever possible, and have met with airlines and some of the people who work the aviation system. So what that's taught me is that this is a very complex system, and it's not an easy one to describe. Every airport has its own independent challenges. But every airport has a lot of similarities and a lot of things that we need to work on. So it's taught me how important the relationship is with the industry itself, how we TSA are an element of a very large system, and for that system to work effectively, you've got to have all those elements talking to one another and working cooperatively.
You've had a chance to visit airports of all sizes here in the United States. You've also had a chance to do some visits overseas.
I have. In fact, just last week I was in the UK, France, and the Netherlands. It was, again, it was an aviation and a surface. As you know, France recently had the attempted attack on a train coming from Amsterdam into Paris. So I wanted to meet with my counterparts and also to see how the aviation system and security system works over there. It was enlightening. It's interesting to see there are a lot of similarities, but there are some unique differences as well, and I see some opportunity for us to get better consistency globally, as well as to understand better what some of their challenges are.
Big issue that you've had to face early on is IG report dealing with checkpoint failures and security at the checkpoint. Talk a little bit about how you've dealt with that issue. Well,
as you know, that report became public during the confirmation process for me. And like everyone, I was disturbed by the failure rate that was reported. I've talked to the IG, I've worked with them. What we've done since then, as you know, Secretary Johnson, the Secretary of Homeland Security, immediately ordered an understanding of the failures themselves and a 10-point plan to correct it. I'm carrying that plan forward. What it really consists of is this. First of all, I wanted to know exactly what happened. What was the nature of the failures that the Inspector General was able to discover. How did they present themselves? And then was it a people failure? Was it a process failure? Was it a technology failure? No surprise, it's some combination of those three in probably every instance. And what we've done is we dissected that. We put a team together that said, take a hard look at this. And that team consisted of people within TSA, people from outside TSA, and people from all levels of TSA, including our frontline screeners. And we said, look, this is a no embarrassment, no holds barred kind of look, and we want to see exactly what went wrong because we need to fix it. This is too important of a mission, and we can't afford to open a vulnerability to any potential enemy out there. Took apart each one of the failures, tried to trace them back to what we think was the initiating cause. What's the root cause of this? And then look to see, is there some version of training or process change or technology improvement that we could do? out of that came a plan to retrain the entire frontline screening workforce. That's about 41,000 people. We're at about 96% now of training. The goal was to get that done by the end of September. And they went through what we called a mission essentials training. Refocus on the mission for which they were hired, refocus on the mission for which they took an oath of office. They're very excited about that, by the way. You know, it's amazing to me how talented and dedicated that frontline workforce is and wants to be. And we walked them through, we gave them a current threat brief. Hey, it's still real. There's still people out there trying to attack the aviation system. We showed them the exact nature of the failures. We showed them what the limits of the technology are, because all technology has limitations. And surprisingly, we had not shared that with the frontline workforce before. And so we wanted them to know, how far can the technology go, and then what do you need to do to go beyond that? And then we improved some of the processes that we had. So I'm very confident that we have addressed the problems that the IG discovered. It's also given us an opportunity to look at the entire system and look for opportunities to improve the system across the board, and to see where the gaps are and the connections that we need to make with our private sector partners as well.
You've talked about the critical nature of training going forward, and that's something that, again, airports do a lot of that training. The workforce does that. That's something that I know when you and I have talked before, you talked about the training that you received when you were in the Coast Guard and the work that they've done, that being a really important deterrent.
Yeah, in fact, one of the things that I've asked our TSA to do, you may be familiar with a notion or an idea that my predecessor, John Pistol, had, and that was to create a TSA Academy. We don't currently have a common, consistent, fundamental baseline training for all of our screeners. Not that we don't train them all, but they all train independently at the airport environment in which they're hired. I think that there's great value to having essentially, you know, a boot camp, if you will, for trainers, just like you do in the military. How do you build a common culture and a connection to a large organization and a connection to mission when you have a geographically dispersed, disparate workforce that you largely rely upon to deliver the mission, but you don't see every day. And you do that, I think, by starting together, and that allows you to build a consistent fundamental baseline. Then when you get to your airport environment, you learn the specifics of your airport. I also think there's opportunity for us to work more closely with the industry and with organizations like AAAE to do common training across the system, so that we understand how the system operates. We understand what airports have to deal with, we understand what airlines deal with, and we understand how they're being trained as well. So I think training is fundamental to the success of an organization. It's certainly fundamental to the professionalism of an organization.
Let me have time for one or two more questions. Let me talk about employee screening. That's another issue that has been a big hot button that you dealt with in your confirmation process as well. And there's this important balance point there in terms of making sure that you are between security and making sure things are looked at, and the efficient functioning of in an airport environment. And so there's a trade-off there, and you're also talking about well, I shouldn't do that. I'll just let you take it from there. Employee screening going forward. What is your thoughts on that?
Well, you highlighted some of the challenges with that, you know, and I think back to my maritime environment experience. I spent a lot of time looking at security in the maritime environment during my career in the Coast Guard, and one of the challenges there was, how do you ensure the free flow of goods and services in a port environment? I look at the airports, it's the same sort of thing. How do you ensure free flow of goods and services, while at the same time ensuring that the population that you expect to be trusted really can be trusted? It never surprises me to find out there's a few criminals operating in the world. The goal is to identify them, to catch them before they do something ideally, or to shut it down quickly if it does happen. So as I look at the events in Atlanta last year and the recent arrests that happened on the West Coast, and I think about how can you ensure that your trusted population really is trusted. I look to organizations like the Aviation Security Advisory Committee. As you know, they came out with a series of recommendations, among which included how do you do employee screening. I do think that there needs to be some sort of a randomized program. I'm in favor of working with airports to reduce access points to the extent possible, recognizing that airports have the need to have things coming in and out. I know that there's been some talk amongst some about doing 100% screening. I don't know how you would do that. I think you need some sort of an expectation in the airport environment. If I'm an employee that has access to sterile areas of the airport, that I'm going to be subject to some form of check on a regular basis. I'm encouraged to see that a lot of airports are doing that very thing, and they're looking at it. And as I said, the Aviation Security Advisory Committee report is an industry-led series of recommendations. And I think that as I've talked to airport executives in the airports that I've visited to date, they're very interested in finding ways to do this effectively. It's a huge challenge. I mean, I was in Atlanta. I think they have some 40 to 50,000 badged employees. And that represents hundreds of individual employers, so it's not an easy thing to get your hand around. But I like this idea of, to the extent possible, reducing access points, and I see a lot of airports doing that. And I also like the idea of doing randomized security checks. So there's an expectation that sometime during the day I'm going to get looked at.
A multi-layered, risk-based approach.
Absolutely.
Instead of a simple, what sounds simple to perhaps a politician. 100%.
Yeah, I'm not sure what
screening.
100% is. You know, because defining that is hard, and figuring out how you would do that. And I'm also concerned that any single checkpoint is defeatable. That's why I talk about a system of security. A passenger checkpoint can be defeated, which is why it's not the only thing we do in the passenger screening environment. There's a lot of virtual screening, and there's other things that are being done to ensure that the person that presents himself at the checkpoint is the person you think they are and they're safe to be there. So it's absolutely based on risk. I'm a big fan of risk-based security and evolving that to the next levels that we need to. And I think the same thing applies in the airport operations area as well as the sterile area of the airport.
Mr. Administrator, we have time for just one last question. Let me ask you about PreCheck. That's a very popular program. There's been efforts to try and expand that. Talk about where we are on PreCheck.
Well, PreCheck is a wonderful program, and it's absolutely the key to our risk-based security initiatives. If you can get a known, trusted population, then I can concentrate on the people that I don't know much about. So I think PreCheck's a great program. We have big plans to expand that over the coming year. As I mentioned once before, I joined Global Entry myself a number of years ago. Partly because it makes my life a lot simpler coming through the airport. It also presents me in a more responsible way to the system. I've identified myself. I'm less of a challenge and I'm less of a problem and I'm less of a risk to the system. And so I encourage people to put themselves into that category. It will also, if we can get the PreCheck population up to about 40%, and I think that's possible. We're at about 25% right now of people coming through expedited screening. I'd like to see that almost double. And if we can get about 40%, it'll transform the airport environment. So what are the plans to do that? We're working with the existing vendor, the PreCheck kiosks that you see in some airports, not only to expand their offerings in airports across the country, but also to look to expand it in other retail establishments out in the community. And we think there's some good opportunity to do that. We're also about to issue a request for proposal which will open up some opportunity for other private sector vendors to come forward and help us market PreCheck. And then we're working with online sites and travel sites to see whether they can, and some have expressed interest in marketing it through their sites and providing it as a benefit to some of their members. So I think there's some real opportunity with PreCheck going forward. I would encourage all of your members to look for ways to help us. We'll be talking to you, Todd, in the future about ways in which maybe AAAE can give us some thoughts on that. But that would dramatically improve our ability to understand who's coming through the system and more importantly to improve the experience for the people that are PreCheck members. It's nice not to have to remove your shoes and your coat and to get expedited screening.
All right. We'll have to leave it at that this time around. Mr. Administrator, thank you for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you, Todd.
I'm Todd Hauptli. Thanks for watching.